Let's have a look at what we call a user group. We mentioned earlier that a user group is a collection of user accounts that share the same security rights and permissions. Now we need to get a better understanding of what are those security rights and what are those permissions to begin with. So you'll find out that there are a lot of predefined groups in Microsoft Windows. You don't need to create them from scratch. They're already there. Some of them will not be active until you start editing them and then assigning users to them, but otherwise they're always there. Especially, for example, already dealt with administrators, we already dealt with guests. The rest of them are already created in there. You can always just use them per your own requirements, depending on what type of job that particular person will be doing at that particular company. Now, part of these particular permissions are what we call file or folder permissions. Now, for us to understand what they are, let's just look into this. Permissions are a method for assigning access rights to a specific for user accounts or user groups. So when you've got access to certain things, it just depends then on saying, what type of access do you have? What are you allowed to do? It's almost like being able to walk into a restaurant. Depending on your age, things that you order will differ. So if you are below 18 in South Africa, obviously you will not be allowed legally to order alcohol, while if you're above 18, obviously you'll be able to order alcohol. But both of you will be allowed into the restaurant. That means both of you have access. That means both of you have got a permission to get in there. Same as with computers. You can actually set up these permissions to make sure that your computers, when they are communicating with each other over the network, they have certain accesses, because this is important. You wouldn't want everyone on the network to have all the access, such as an administrator on your network. So you would want maybe to set up people who come to visit your company, meaning your guests, to have certain access and not be able to have the internal nitty-gritties of the company and so forth. You would want maybe your other department, be it your accounting department, for example, for lack of a better example, to have certain access to certain documents, but not be able to edit that particular document. They can only read that. Maybe there's a document with the rules of how the company should move on and stuff like that coming from HR. People who receive that should not be able to edit it, while HR should then have all the access, what we call full access, which means they can actually be able to edit or delete that particular file. These particular rights can easily be expressed this way. As you can see here, it's written permissions for users, allow or deny. So what you can then do for any particular, once you're an administrator, actually, for any particular file, you can actually come to its properties. For example, I'm looking at this learner guide. I can just right click properties. And once I'm on properties, as you can see, I've got access to all these particular details. Once I go to security, it then says, what do you want to do for everyone who gets this particular file? I can actually go on and edit this and say, I do not want to give them full control. I do not want them to be able to modify and so forth. So all these will mean that the moment this person gets this particular file, they will not be able to do certain things to it. Maybe you do not want it to be modified. But just remember, once they are also administrator on their own computer, they are also able to come and they have the same type of rights on this particular file. So this is easier then to control when it's your own network and all the computers belong there and you have put them in their particular groups, and certain groups will not be able to edit the security rights of any file. But once these are being shared with different computers on different networks, it means they also have access to change those particular rights. It's almost like you're giving security to your house, and then you give everyone the key. It doesn't mean that you have security anymore. So at this particular point in our local area networks, we always make sure that we are only the ones who are administrators and who are able to take control of these particular resources. And we can even put another permission to say, are you permitted to even share this particular file over the network and so forth. And that can really make it be more secure. All right, moving on. So these are then what those particular permissions actually mean. Read, it means allows the viewing and listing of a file or folder. When viewing a folder, you can view all its files and subfolders. Write, it means allowing writing to a file, adding files and subfolders to that particular folder. Literally, we can think of reading as being able to view and write as being able to edit, meaning you can add, subtract, and so forth. List folder contents. This permission can be assigned only to folders. It permits the viewing of and listing of files and subfolders, as well executing files that are found in that particular folder. This is a very tricky permission because also if that folder contains a virus, you might be in trouble. So by default, you find that most times Windows has got this particular type of permission deactivated. And once you want it activated, you really have to know what you're talking about, unless if you want to cause harm or just want to take unnecessary risk on your particular PC. Read and execute. This means there's a permission to read and accessing of a file's contents as well as its execution. Execution literally means installation. So in this particular case, or running of that particular file. So again, by default, normally all this is deactivated for security reasons. So if you just give this to any file that you receive, you might actually run into more problems than you might anticipate for. So it might be better for these particular things to be actually deactivated. Then you can always activate them knowing what you're doing. So when dealing with folders, it allows the viewing and listing of files, subfolders, as well as the execution of files. That might be a virus being executed or being run. You don't want that to then happen. So that's why these permissions are different depending on what type of user you find yourself to be. Then there's modify. When dealing with files, it allows their reading, writing, and deletion. When dealing with folders, it allows the reading and writing of files and subfolders plus the deletion of those particular folders. This is literally a combination of your read and write all at the same time. Then full control, it allows reading, writing, changing, and deleting of any file or subfolder. So this is literally what you have as an administrator on any computer. Once you're an administrator, you have access to all these particular permissions we just listed on top. Right. There are other permissions which are very important to certain situations. For example, we have a question here to say, why are permissions important to sharing in Windows, in Microsoft, literally? So you see that it's on a local area network or on a network, for example. If we didn't have these permissions in place, it means there will be havoc. Everyone has got access to everything and everyone can do anything. So nothing will be true anymore. Just imagine what you would do if you had access to being able to change every newspaper in the world, or having access just to change a few of your friends' social media accounts. I'm sure there are certain pictures over there you would have deleted by now. There are certain comments over there you wouldn't want to be there or by now, and all those things. So those are some important things that you could do if you had access to those particular things. But why don't you have access to them? Because they are private. So that's another thing we need to always keep in mind. Privacy is of paramount importance. So once we put these access permissions, we are then able to keep our folders and subfolders secure and private, so that people don't just end up doing what they want with them. So, read or write, it is an equivalent of more modified permission level. Read is an equivalent of read and execute permission level. So, these are some of the things that we then put, again, to make sure that we're actually secure. So, we might actually make sure that we don't activate modification of any file that we are sharing, depending on what type of file it is, or we can actually make sure that we don't allow it to be read, depending on what type type of file it is, or we don't allow any files found from the internet to be automatically read. And I'm sure you have faced this a bit when you download files from the internet, and when you open them on your computer, it always asks you, do you want to allow this for editing on your computer? And it even warns you, allowing this for editing on your computer might actually make you be more prone to attacks. So just make sure that you understand all those things. Otherwise, that might end up with you in more trouble than what you would have anticipated for. I think we've done justice to all these permission levels. Let's meet again on the next part of our lesson.